my first YouTube video ever, so please be kind. If you are clicking on this video, then hopefully you know something about zero waste, or at least you're curious about it. In fact, if you're only curious about it, you really are who I'm talking to. If you don't know about the seriousness of climate change, if you don't know just how bad the situation is, or all the different situations that are resulting from climate change and all of the destruction that we're putting on our planet, then I highly recommend Naomi Klein's book, This Changes Everything: Capitalism versus the Climate. This book came out in September of 2014, and it is a big one. It's 577 pages, and I actually listened to it as an audiobook. When I listened to this book, I'll admit I had a rough time. It is a very weighty book. It has real gravity, and for someone who's even remotely sensitive about these issues, it could cause depression. Just saying. I struggled with that, and it put me in a group of people that Annie Leonard describes in The Story of Stuff. So that's my second recommendation. So if you're well educated on climate change, and by well educated I mean, do you actually know the ins and outs and at least some basic science and biology behind what's happening, then Naomi Klein's book is my big recommendation for that. Another kind of big picture book, although it's not a picture book, get it together, Annie Leonard. Annie Leonard's The Story of Stuff: How Our Obsession with Stuff is Trashing the Planet, Our Communities, and Our Health, and a Vision for Change. Chances are you may have heard about this book or the documentary, The Story of Stuff, that is based on it. But this is a 356-page book that came out in 2010, much earlier than all the other books I'm recommending, but I'm just now getting to it. So I've, disclaimer, only read the introduction so far. If you'd like to see me do a review of The Story of Stuff as a whole when I'm finished with it, please comment below. If you just want to support somebody just starting out with their first video, give this video a thumbs up. Thank you very much. So in this book, crisis fatigue comes up already in the introduction. And crisis fatigue is just what it sounds like, where we are inundated with so many serious causes, many important things, many big problems that people, advertisers, groups, organizations are coming at you with constantly. It's like, you know, here is a serious issue or cause, something must be done about it. And all those different issues kind of get lost in the cacophony of like, oh no, like everything is terrible. How could we even possibly choose what to focus on? And so in the face of that crisis fatigue, which admittedly I've probably been experiencing for a few years, and it kind of leaves me a little paralyzed and not knowing where to start. But what can we do? What can we do? It's too much information. It's all overwhelming. I personally have chosen to focus on environmentalism because I am a big picture thinker, and I like that when I don't know what to do, I can try to get at a really root problem. And while I believe that all of the inhabitants of Earth are very important, human or otherwise, living or not, blah, 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 I think they're all super important. And so without another idea of a place to start, I like looking at the home that encompasses us all, and without that home, none of these other issues will exist, of course. So in that introduction, in Annie Leonard's The Story of Stuff, she breaks down some of the potential groups of people based on their reaction to climate change. So once you become aware, whether it's by reading Naomi Klein's This Changes Everything, reading articles on the internet, maybe you saw Inconvenient Truth, Al Gore's documentary from several years ago, whatever it is that kind of opened your eyes to the severity of climate change and the urgency of this problem, you may have had a number of different responses. And Annie Liddard is a little critical, I think, of those particular responses, but I have kind of reorganized her idea of responses into 5 different groups. So the first I've already mentioned is those who shut down in the face of this overwhelming information. And I have been there, and I've gone through phases where I feel like I just don't know what to do. And so there is a despair that we might experience when we hear this, especially if you tackle it all at once and you don't break it down into chunks, you might become overwhelmed. So shutting down, kind of turning a blind eye to what's happening, because what do you do? And it also brings up a lot of existential questions, and that can be really difficult for a lot of people to deal with, especially in our busy modern world, but I think it's still worthwhile. And as someone who is prone to the philosophical, I actually like that issues like this force us to ask those life and death questions, ask about the meaning of life and all that kind of stuff. So another group that she mentions, and there are there's the good and bad that comes with this potential group. And one of them are the kind of very serious scientific approaches. And some of that includes, like in Naomi Klein's This Changes Everything, that response that is wholly informative. And that works really well for the scientifically minded, but for the mainstream public, it might be kind of off-putting. The bad side of that are the scientific responses that have an inordinate amount of faith in technology, and they think, well, we're human, we'll come up with something, like whatever destruction we do, we'll figure out a fix, we'll find a way to fix it, we'll like throw extra bad chemicals on it, or like we can manipulate the weather. And it's a very anthropocentric, egotistical, it's like hubris to the nth degree. And so there's a good and bad side to some of the scientific responses. The third group similarly has different sides to it. A more positive side might be like activists and campaigners, although admittedly that can be a turnoff to the mainstream public as well. And what Leonard points out is kind of the downfall or the inadequacy of those groups is that they become very isolated in their causes. So they might be tackling a really specific issue, like chaining themselves to a tree to save like an endangered species, like one species of animal. And that may be a very worthy cause, but again, it fails to get at the big picture. What she calls systemic thinking, or how she refers to systems thinking, which I've already outed myself as being a systems thinker. She says that it is the system that must not be named. I love that she makes it this Harry Potter world kind of thing. It's just like Voldemort, the system that must not be named, capitalism. So the system that must not be named, capitalism, is the overall system that doesn't get addressed if you're specializing in really particular causes instead of looking at what has led us to this point. The other side of a similar group are the shrill voices. I think of them as like the finger waggers, and they're the people who kind of short-sightedly just say, I've discovered this way to live, so you better do the exact same thing. Do what I say, and they're kind of like the people who will stand over you as you're about to throw something away and be like, why didn't you put that in the recycling? You must be a horrible person, right? They're like grammar Nazis, and a lot of people assume that because I'm an English major that I'm going to be a grammar Nazi. And telling someone exactly what to do and being really shrill about it is usually not very effective. It's unpleasant, and nobody really wants to be around those people. There's a place for them too, but it still doesn't quite fit what I want my response to be. What comes much closer to that are the last two groups that Leonard talks about. And again, she kind of couches these responses as all being inadequate, but there are two that I think I fall into. I'm especially guilty of falling into the group of conscious consumers. Clearly, this doesn't get at the big picture. It functions within the system that must not be named, capitalism. So within that system, someone will say, you don't have to make big changes. We can just all continue living the same lives we lead now, keep going along the same way, just be more choosy about which products you pick. So it kind of encourages you to keep buying just as much as you always would, conduct your life exactly the same way, but when you're in the grocery or another store, choose the, greenwashed product over the other one. So maybe, and I've definitely done this for a lot of my adult life, when I'm financially able and I think I need paper towels, I'm going to choose the unbleached kind that are good for the environment, or maybe it says it's like biodegradable or compostable, and I'll choose that instead of the bleached white, big corporation paper towel. And at best, these this approach of conscious consuming is not getting at the core of the issue. At worst, it can actually be more harmful than the original choice. Case in point, with those paper towels, if I'm buying paper towels that say they're biodegradable, or like perhaps an even better example are those little bags to clean up after your dog, and they say like they're biodegradable or compostable, something like that, or like paper towels. The only way that's helping anyone or anything is if I allow that paper towel once it's been used. It's all about what you do with the product after you've used it. Once you're done with it, what happens next? And if you're throwing that paper towel in the trash, it's going to the landfill. And once it gets to the landfill, it is in a place that is designed to prevent decomposition. So it may be biodegradable under the best of circumstances. If you let it rot, in a natural environment, great, eventually it won't exist anymore, it won't be having a negative impact on the planet or taking up more space. But if it's in a landfill, it's just going to emit harmful gases, and it's going to stay in the same shape, and probably like 20 years from now, you can still tell that it's a paper towel. So at worst, that can actually do more harm than good to kind of succumb to the greenwashing of advertising. The other one is finally the group that we're talking about today, downshifters. Okay, that's my first part of my very first YouTube video ever, wherein I talk about the big picture of the environment and recommend 2 books. But if you want to hear more about the downshifting response and several zero waste plastic free book recommendations, click on part 2. Head on over. See you there.